Do you know if I told you that 5 of the most beloved faces of the 20th century were smiling through something none of us were ever meant to see? Millions loved them. Millions still do.
But behind every studio contract, every magazine cover, every Oscar speech, there was a system, a machine built to manufacture perfection. And it did not care what it cost the people inside it. Tonight, we go behind 5 smiles: Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, Natalie Wood, Rock Hudson. Different decades, different studios, different secrets. But ask yourself this: why do so many stories from Hollywood's golden age end the same way? Alone. Afraid. And gone too soon. Would you believe that the woman millions of men dreamed about didn't even know for certain who her own father was?
Do you know what a studio contract actually meant in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s? It meant your face, your voice, your marriage, even your name belonged to someone else.
The men who ran MGM, Universal, and Warner Brothers didn't just make movies. They built human products. And products don't get to have breakdowns. Products don't get to be gay. Products don't get to be tired.
What if I told you that the most photographed woman of the 20th century, millions loved her? Directors built entire films around her smile.
Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926. Her mother, Gladys, could not care for her. There was no stable father. So Norma Jean grew up in foster homes and an orphanage, placed with a series of families, at least 2 of whom abused her. By 16, her greatest fear wasn't poverty. It was being sent back to that orphanage and the crushing loneliness that came with it. Judy Garland was performing before she could read fluently. By the time she signed with MGM at 13, her mother was already controlling her body. According to biographer Gerald Clark, Garland's mother had begun giving her pills to control her energy before she had even turned 10. A child was already being chemically managed before Hollywood ever got its hands on her. Montgomery Clift came from a wealthy, unstable Nebraska family, obsessed with appearances. He turned to Broadway as a teenager. Escaping into performance, the way so many of these children did. Not toward fame, but away from something at home. Natalie Wood appeared in her first film at 4 years old. She never had a childhood outside a film set. Her mother, by several accounts, pushed her into the industry relentlessly and nurtured superstitions about her daughter's fate. including a warning repeated for years that Natalie should fear dark water. Rock Hudson, born Roy Scherer in Winnetka, Illinois, was abandoned by his father as a boy. He reinvented himself entirely to survive Hollywood. A new name, a new voice, a new face for the cameras. The real Roy Scherer would disappear for the next 3 decades. The world believed they had everything, yet each of them, in private, was already paying a price the public never saw. By the 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was the most photographed woman on Earth. But those closest to the work say her confidence in front of the camera masked a private torment. In her own words, preserved in interviews collected across decades, there is a need for aloneness, which most people don't realize an actor carries. She once admitted of her own craft that she could feel her lack of training as if it were cheap clothes I was wearing inside. A rare, unguarded moment of self-doubt from a woman the whole world assumed had no doubts at all. Judy. At MGM, Judy Garland's stardom was manufactured with chemistry, not just charisma. Studio doctors prescribed amphetamines and barbiturates to control both her energy and her weight, a cocktail that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She herself recalled the routine: pep pills to perform, sleeping pills to knock her out, and pep pills again to wake her up. A cycle that let the studio work her and her co-star for what she described as 72 hours straight. She won the world's heart as Dorothy. She was already, by 17, dependent on the drugs that would end her life 3 decades later. Montgomery Clift refused the standard studio contract. He wanted to choose his own roles, a radical idea in an industry built on ownership. Then, in 1956, driving home from a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, he fell asleep at the wheel and hit a telephone pole. The crash caused severe facial injuries that required months of reconstructive surgery. Taylor is said to have cradled his head at the scene and helped clear his airway. His friends, including Rock Hudson, physically blocked photographers from the wreck. He went back to work, but something in him had changed. Natalie Wood transitioned from child star to leading lady with a rare grace. 3 Academy Award nominations, roles in Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story. But even as she became one of the industry's most bankable stars, her personal life was complicated by a turbulent marriage to actor Robert Wagner, a divorce, a remarriage, and a fear of water that everyone around her seemed to know about. Universal built Rock Hudson into the ultimate leading man. Tall, composed, seemingly the perfect husband any woman could want. But it was a performance, both on screen and off. In 1955, facing the threat of exposure by a scandal magazine, Universal arranged a hasty marriage of convenience between husband and his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The union barely survived 3 years. Was fame really worth what it demanded from each of them? This is the part of the story the posters never showed you. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe's private struggles with insomnia, sedatives, and depression had become an open secret in Hollywood circles. She died in August 1962 at 36. A psychologist who studied her life later offered a blunt assessment of the tragedy. Not simply suicide, but a slow death from loneliness and emptiness, in which everything she reached for to ease the pain only made it worse. Decades of biographers, going back to Norman Mailer's controversial 1973 book, floated theories of government surveillance and conspiracy, claims that remain unproven and are treated with skepticism by serious historians. What is documented is simpler and sadder. A woman who told the world she needed solitude to survive, and who ultimately did not survive at all.
By her mid-20s, Garland had suffered multiple breakdowns. MGM released her from her contract after more than 30 films. She rebuilt her career on stage and radio, earning a Tony Award and an Oscar nomination for A Star is Born, proof of a talent that never actually left her. But the addiction the studio had planted in her as a child never left either. In 1969, in a London bathroom, Judy Garland died of a barbiturate overdose at 47.
After the 1956 crash, Cliff's career slid, even as he delivered some of his most acclaimed performances, including his Oscar-nominated turn in Judgment at Nuremberg. He became dependent on alcohol and chloral hydrate, a sedative. Biographer Patricia Bosworth's 1978 book gave his final decade a phrase that has followed him ever since. Years of drinking and pill-taking that friends called the longest suicide in Hollywood history. He died of a heart attack in 1966 at 45. For decades, biographers linked his decline to shame over his sexuality. But more recent accounts from his own family, including a 2018 documentary made by his nephew, dispute that narrative, noting he had long, loving relationships with both men and women, and was not tormented by his identity the way earlier books claimed. It's a reminder that even dark reality documentaries can get the story wrong, and that the truth deserves more care than a headline.
On November 28, 1981, Natalie Wood was aboard the yacht Splendor near Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken. Sometime in the night, she vanished. Her body was found the next morning, floating roughly a mile from the boat with a small dinghy beached nearby. The death was ruled an accidental drowning. But in 2011, over 30 years later, investigators reopened the case, and in 2012, her death certificate was formally amended. The cause of death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, after the coroner's office could not determine when certain bruises and scratches on her body had occurred. In 2018, sheriff's investigators publicly named Wagner a person of interest, not a suspect, but someone whose account they wanted re-examined. No charges have ever been filed. What happened on the Splendor that night remains to this day officially unresolved.
For 30 years, Rock Hudson maintained the illusion Hollywood required of him. Then, in July 1985, a press release from a hospital in Paris changed everything. Rock Hudson had AIDS, becoming the first major celebrity to disclose the diagnosis publicly. He did not explicitly come out as gay in that statement. He didn't have to. The world understood. He died 2 months later, on October 2nd, 1985, at 59. Weeks before his death, he sent a message to be read at a fundraiser organized by his friend Elizabeth Taylor. "I am not happy that I am sick. I am not happy that I have AIDS. But if that is helping others, I can at least know that my own misfortune has had some positive worth. His diagnosis and his death are widely credited with transforming public understanding of the AIDS epidemic, and his estate helped fund what became the American Foundation for AIDS Research.
Why did Hollywood hide so much of what was actually happening to the people it celebrated?
Marilyn Monroe is still, 6 decades later, one of the most photographed faces in human history. Judy Garland's voice still opens The Wizard of Oz every holiday season. Montgomery Clift's performances are still studied in acting classes as the blueprint for a new kind of emotional honesty on screen. Natalie Wood's films remain classics of American cinema. Rock Hudson's final act of honesty helped shift how an entire generation understood a disease that had been treated as unspeakable. Each of them gave audiences something real, and in return, the industry too often gave them a script for how to disappear. But perhaps the saddest part isn't how these legends lived. It's that millions watched their movies, hummed their songs, and hung their posters on bedroom walls without ever knowing the real people behind the smiles. Marilyn Monroe's FBI file, accumulated from 1955 onward, grew into one of the more extensive celebrity surveillance records of its era, filled, according to biographer Donald Spoto, with material that amounted to little more than paperwork. Judy Garland was already being given pills to regulate her sleep and energy before she had even turned 10 years old, before MGM ever signed her. Rock Hudson, Michael Wilding, and Kevin McCarthy formed a human shield around Montgomery Clift's stretcher after his 1956 car crash, so photographers couldn't capture his disfigured face. Natalie Wood's own mother had been warned years earlier by a fortune teller that her daughter should beware of dark water, a story that resurfaced only after her death at sea. Rock Hudson's final gesture was not a film role, but a $250,000 bequest that helped launch what is now known as AMFAR, one of the world's leading AIDS research foundations.
If stories like these matter to you, hit subscribe. Every week, Timeless Voices goes behind another smile, shows you who was standing behind it. See you next time.